Hello, and welcome to Horror Rewind. This is Kelly Florence.
And I'm Meg Hofdahl.
And today we're talking about Sleepy Hollow. This movie came out in 1999. It seems like we've been on a kick with this in the past few months, the 1999 movies. It was directed by Tim Burton, of course. It's a 68% on Rotten Tomatoes, had a box office of $207 million with a budget of $70 million. Meg, a year ago this month, we were in Sleepy Hollow for reals.
I know, I can't believe it took us a whole year to do this movie after being in Sleepy Hollow. But it was so fun being there because, just also too, because I'm a literature nerd. I really liked being in the cemetery there where Washington Irving was buried, and just sort of like picturing how he might have seen Sleepy Hollow when he wrote it and everything. It was very fun.
Now, my earliest exposure to the legend of Sleepy Hollow was the Mickey Mouse cartoon or Disney, and that image of the Headless Horseman throwing the flaming pumpkin into the screen. Apparently, that is what inspired Tim Burton to want to direct this, and he wasn't the first choice, but he was an intern or an assistant or something at Disney back in the day, and that was his inspiration, and that shot made it into the movie. And I was like, was this a 3D movie? Because that would have been perfect. It wasn't. But do you remember that Disney cartoon?
It's so funny that you bring that up because yes, I do, and it was very profound for me, and I don't really know why. Well, maybe I do know why, because I like decapitation. I don't know. But I stayed home from school one day, and I was legitimately sick. And I remember my mom making me like chicken noodle soup or tomato soup or something, and I was all like cuddled up, and that came on, and it was like I ascended to heaven because it was like finally a cartoon I can care about, you know?
Yes.
I was so excited. It was something that kept me distracted from being sick, and it was sort of like, I think a lot of people who like horror often talk about like the Beetlejuice cartoon and the Ghostbusters cartoon, and they kind of got to have that feeling. And for me, obviously I like those too, but this one really stuck out in my mind because it was one of the first times it was like, wow, this is something that I really like. I remember Ichabod Crane so well because I just loved him too. He was funny. I remember thinking how funny he was. And so, yeah, it was actually kind of a good childhood memory. And so then when I got older and learned about the folklore, and when I was in college, I read more that story and then some other Washington Irving. And then, of course, when I was in high school, I went and saw this movie.
I love it. Now, speaking of Sleepy Hollow, before we get into this movie, there is the TV show Sleepy Hollow, of course. Did you watch it, and how far in did you watch it?
This came out when I still had, like, Dexter was still in, like, diapers and napping, and I remember, like, I'm going to sit down during his nap for, like, have an hour to myself and try Sleepy Hollow. And I don't know if I watched the whole first season, but I didn't. I mean, I was excited because I love this movie and of all the before mentioned reasons, but I don't know why it fell flat for me. It just eventually did, I guess.
And I remember, I think I watched the pilot and I loved it, or I really liked it. But again, I think it was just a time in my life where I couldn't commit to it. And now, I mean, I feel like back then too, if you necessarily didn't have things on demand, like you had to record it or whatever. And so I didn't have it accessible, and I never watched it. I'm assuming it's somewhere now. But I think I definitely feel like going back to revisit it, but I don't know if it kept up with the hype.
It's one of those things where I wouldn't mind going back and trying it again, but I hate watching a show that like got canceled before it was able to like have its time, and I can't remember if it's like a fully fledged story, because I think there's like a ship in it and stuff, and I'd hate for it like that never happens, and then I like watch 3 seasons or however many seasons there are, and then it just drops off, and it's like Briscoe County or something at the end.
I know that would be the worst. Okay, so we were watching this last night, and we were freaking out to each other because Johnny Depp and Tim Burton. Okay, so either one of those on their own. Either one of those people on their own are exceptional, but them together, like they've never made a bad movie together, have they? Like in not in my opinion.
I feel like a bad fan because I feel like there's a couple that I've missed. I've never seen the Alice in Wonderland movies. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Tim Burton. I feel really bad about that. But I remember, again, talking about profound and moments of my childhood and adulthood that I remember so well are watching Tim Burton movies. I can remember the first time I saw Ed Wood, the first time I saw Edward Scissorhands, the first time I saw Sleepy Hollow. It's like they're so. I remember being at a sleepover and I was the only one who liked Frankenweenie, and I was like, why is nobody else just absolutely enthralled with Frankenweenie? So it was. I turned to you when we were watching it and I said, this is the first time I realized that there was a filmmaker that I really loved, and I appreciate when filmmakers find their muse, and he obviously did that with Johnny Depp. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's so many good ones.
I was mentioning too Sweeney Todd. Like when we were watching Sleepy Hollow, it reminded me a lot of Sweeney Todd. And they're not necessarily set and even in the same era, but they have the same sort of aesthetic. And I mean, a lot of his movies do, but how beautiful is this movie? How perfect is Johnny Depp? Johnny Depp was Tim Burton's first choice, obviously, for the role of Ichabod Crane. But the movie studio said, well, what about Brad Pitt? What about Liam Neeson? What about Daniel Day-Lewis? Can you imagine?
Daniel Day-Lewis is so serious. I'm sure he could have done it, but no, it has to be Johnny Depp. And I love in this movie, and I said this last night too, is that he's vulnerable and he's not like this typical manly man. And they have that guy, they have Casper Van Dien be like the man, the big guy, but he's just he's a scientist, and he has had this past trauma, we find out, where he's at home with his mother. The maternal spirit is strong with him, and his father comes in and kills his mother and ruins his childhood. And I thought there was some interesting points being made there. And he's doing things that are very much in the female mode of what we believe how females should act, as in fainting and all that stuff. Yet they didn't make a joke out of him. He's still a well-rounded character. Thank you, Johnny Depp.
So I read that he based his character on Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes, his portrayal of the Sherlock Holmes character, and then also Vincent Price. And that, he too is a muse for Tim Burton, or, he was a major fanboy because, well, Vincent Price, of course, is in Edward Scissorhands, and then his character or caricature is in Frankenweenie, and I mean, just in general, I think he pays homage to him a lot. But this, do you know who played the Headless Horseman? Not Christopher Walken, but the actual Headless Horseman?
No.
It was Ray Park who plays Darth Maul in the Star Wars movies. Isn't that funny?
That's really cool. He was at a con I was at. Like, oh, that's neat to think about. See, if I'd known that, I mean, not that I don't like Star Wars, but that for me as a goth, I'd find even more interesting.
I know, I didn't know it either, but that is super cool. And I know that Ray Park is not a tall fellow, and so that makes sense that he would be able to play a headless horseman and do all this physicality, because he was a stunt performer, of course, he is. And so he was the Headless Horseman. I just love it. Oh, and then the one of the blonde guys. So speaking of Daniel Day-Lewis, who was up for this role but didn't get it, he's in Last of the Mohicans, one of the blonde guys, and the uncle from Harry Potter with the eyes that aren't exactly straight. He's also one of the characters, the constable or something. I can't remember. But I was like, where do I know these guys from? So I had to IMDb them. So they're from, recognizable things.
Yeah, well, and of course, Tim Burton uses a lot of actors over again. I mean, there's like there's problematic ones I won't point out, but there's also Lisa Marie, who he was with for a long time, but she's in Mars Attacks, Ed Wood, lots of movies, and so I appreciate that he uses actors over and over again. Um, Something I love about this movie so much. Wait, but first I have to say, Ichabod, I've never heard in any other scenario. Have you ever met an Ichabod or read of an Ichabod?
No, but my goodness, what an incredible name.
It is. And I was like thinking, wow, I don't hear that name anymore. And then I was like, wait, I can't think of any old-timey person I know with that actual name. But it must have been a name.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite things is when the shit is hitting the fan, the horror is happening, everything's awful, a romance flourishes. That's my favorite. I love when we can take horror and we can take a romance, because I don't know, there's something about a romance happening when all this horrible scary stuff's going on that just makes me happy.
I know, and I feel like it's rare. I mean, it doesn't always happen. Um, I was thinking, just as I said that, I was thinking how in Evil Dead 2: An Army of Darkness, Ash finds love somehow.
Oh, love, yeah, I guess.
I mean, those are not fully fleshed out characters or romances, but whatever. Okay, so speaking of, you were talking about this past with the mother and everything. I was wondering, what do you think about this? Because we've written about the mother figure in our upcoming book, The Science of Women in Horror. What do you think about this manic pixie dream girl, but instead it's like this manic pixie dream mother, and like these characters having this perfect mother figure?
You know, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I feel like if Jason heard you say something like
No!
that, he would not be impressed. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think when we're analyzing that particular trope, we're seeing it through romance eyes. But there is something to be said, especially for the way men see their mothers, again, is that they are perfect and not flawed in any way. And that's true. I never really thought about that. But this is a great example. And obviously, Tim Burton's really good at romanticizing things. So I could see how this would sort of put it into your brain. Yeah.
So, I don't know if there's a term for that, but we're going to come up with it. And maybe I just coined it now, manic pixie dream mother. But I feel like that's been a trope that we've seen at least in some movies, and not, like I said, not maybe necessarily just in horror, but romanticizing the mother, and then that's literally what spurs them on to seek revenge, or why they pursue their this path. Two sort of maybe silly examples, and they're both in the vampire trope, but Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter and Blade are both avenging their mother's death because they had a manic pixie dream mothers.
Aw, but I'm sure their moms were perfect.
All moms are, right? So also something else we explore in both books that are coming out, we explore witches and just being accused of witchcraft. And we've talked about this on previous episodes, but if you're accused of being a witch, like, your time is up. In this era, it was 1799, like, you're done.
Yeah, and they bring that in with, that's what ended up, I think, happening with his mother. And then Christina Ricci, of course, I can't think of her name in the movie, but she's sort of accused of being a witch, which is very interesting because, of course, we see the witch in the woods, who's very creepy and scary, but also he listens to the barely teenage boy who's like, yeah, that's the evil eye, and of course Ichabod just trusts him and is like, I guess it's the evil eye. And I thought that was kind of funny that they were just like, instead of asking her or checking to see if maybe she's trying to help you out, is just assuming that these are dastardly deeds if it's something he doesn't understand. But I thought, for a movie that's obviously made for broad enjoyment, I thought they did a good job of making Ichabod have a backstory. I feel like maybe Christina Ricci's character could have been fleshed out a little bit more. I thought it was interesting. I looked it up, and when the movie came out, Johnny Depp was 36 and she was 19. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I was like, I appreciate that it was a chaste relationship, because she must have been 18 when they filmed it. And that's quite an age difference.
Yeah, it is. And I wondered that too because, she was Wednesday Addams in the Addams family, not that very much before that. So I was thinking like she had to have been young when this was filmed. I mean, Johnny Depp, he doesn't age. He drank as many actors have from that immortal fountain because my goodness. Okay, this setting, this aesthetic, in the fall with the trees bare and the leaves on the ground in the forest. That is my jam in real life and in film. And I remember being a child and walking through our woods and hoping to walk through the mist and the fog into a portal where I would be taken back in time or to another place because I had read a book where that happened to, some teenage girl. I mean, Meg, I live for the fall.
I know. I was actually just thinking about how I was thinking about getting a tattoo, like a Halloween fallish tattoo, because I just love it so much. I live for the fall too, and Tim Burton went inside our minds and found our aesthetic. Not just in this movie, but in all his movies. I mean, that's what his visuals, and he just understands. He understands us. That's what it is. And not every movie he's ever done is perfect, but I just so much appreciate in this movie that he did that fall aesthetic, the old-timey aesthetic, his own aesthetic, and he balanced it all well. Because we all know, like, Tim Burton could go nuts. He could have had stripes circus everywhere. But I thought he did a very good balance of, like, embodying Sleepy Hollow.
Now, something interesting that I read in regards to this movie is that the guy who wrote the treatment for this, the idea for a Sleepy Hollow movie, actually wanted it to be more of like just a slasher movie. He wanted it to be like Halloween or Friday the 13th, and it was going to have a much different tone. And then when the studio picked it up, they were like, actually, let's do something more classic. And eventually Tim Burton came on, and it became a much different movie than the treatment had created it to be. What would you think if this was Sleepy Hollow, like, but it's basically just Jason?
I don't know. I mean, I really like this movie, and again, in big part to Ichabod Crane. So I feel like, what would that look like? What would that Ichabod be like, I wonder? Would he just be ridiculous, or would he get killed right away? And I don't know, would it be in modern time? I don't know. I can't picture. I like the way they did it. I'm glad it's not like just a typical slasher. I mean, I don't think this movie like reinvented the wheel or anything, but I don't know. I guess he's kind of like voiceless and, kind of that like silent Michael Myers type.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he was the original slasher, or was Jack the Ripper before the Headless Horseman?
No, I think the Headless Horseman's before Jack the Ripper.
Headless Horseman is the original slasher, you guys!
Oh my god, what if he is Jack the Ripper?
So yeah, I agree. I like how they did this, and obviously they updated it in the TV show, which I will have to go back and watch. But no, I love this aesthetic. I remember the trailer for this movie when it came out, and I saw the scene last night. That little boy, and he lights, those lamps where it's like turning and the images are going on the walls. Spoiler alert, the Headless Horseman kills that kid. He decapitates that little kid.
Yeah, I didn't remember that, and I saw it, and I was like, I mean, they don't show it, but they show it, and I'm like, oh, I feel like they wouldn't do that now.
I know, it feels like it goes a little far. And yeah, they don't show it. I mean, they show him getting dragged out of the floor where he's hiding, and then they show the Headless Horseman shoving his, apparent head into the bag along with his parents' heads. Like, that's pretty dark, and they went there. But wow.
Yeah, which again, I feel like this movie, as much as Tim Burton could do, made it sort of broadly appealing. So it's kind of interesting that they went that route. And yeah, I wonder Wonder if that would fly now, 20 years later. I don't know.
Another one of the tropes that this movie has, and maybe the original story, I can't remember, but it has that concept of the wicked stepmother. So Christina Ricci's stepmother, it's Miranda Richardson, and she is actually the witch, and she's actually the one who's controlling the Headless Horseman, and she's really the bad guy, but she doesn't look evil, but it's her. She also has the twin in the woods who, there is a witch, and it's layered and it's interesting, and it's not maybe necessarily who you'd suspect, but as I was thinking about these concepts of the perfect mother versus the stepmother who tends to be evil. So that's why I think I said this to you, and you'll see this in our writing in the future rewinders. But let's have stepmothers who aren't evil, right?
We're gonna write that movie. We're gonna get on it. The nice stepmother, and then the mother's evil. Yeah, I love female villains, of course. So yeah, I like that the element that she's the baddie in this, and also it helps. Again, like if you think about from slasher terms, if it was more of a slasher and it was just the Headless Horseman being like Jason, like I feel like it would need another element maybe. So I appreciate in this movie that she's sort of like bringing him forth and waking him up. And this movie isn't particularly scary, but I think Christopher Walken looks pretty dang creepy.
He's totally gross, and his teeth, like how they have his teeth, he's like vampirish, and they have him like when he drags her to the underworld at the end, he kisses her and her mouth is bleeding. I mean, it's pretty grotesque. It's good. Again, it's maybe not jump scares or anything, but how about this whole like feel of this movie? I mean, this is like injected into my veins, tattooed on my body.
I know.
Projected on my tombstone. What else can I say?
I know. I feel like sometimes you can forget how wonderful, especially like this is just the height of like Tim Burton, Johnny Depp years. Like, it had led up to this, but with Edward Scissorhands and Ed Wood and just all the wonderfulness, it's like sometimes you just forget how amazing it was, and then I see it because I always know, okay, I love Tim Burton, I love those movies, but sometimes you just need to see them again, and you're like, wow, no wonder I love this so much. And Johnny Depp is such a good actor. I remember when I was about 13, 14, my friend and I watched, did you see the movie Don Juan DeMarco?
Yeah.
We were screaming because we'd never seen anybody so hot in our life. And then after the movie, we had to open the windows in her bedroom because we were both so flushed and hot because we couldn't. That was the first time like I had seen a movie where somebody was just so hot in it that I could not like handle it. And we were just sitting there hot and like, oh my God, what just happened? Because he's so fucking charming.
He is. And so I think, do you remember Chocolat?
Yes.
I mean, okay, I love him in those like very obviously sexy roles, but I also love him as Sweeney Todd. I realize he's a murderer, but I'm still in love with him. I also love him in Dark Shadows. Like, I love him as Willy Wonka. What is wrong with me?
I'm hot for Ichabod Crane. I can say it. I'll say it here. I don't mind. No, it's because it's Johnny Depp. And he's just... he contains multitudes, Kelly, and he's also just very good to look at.
Oh, he's so talented. No, seriously though. I mean, what did we do to deserve Johnny Depp and Tim Burton making movies together? Like, what happened in the universe for them to exist in the same time period so that we could get the gifts that are all the movies they created together?
And I want them to go back and do it again. And I want them to do it again and again and again, which I know is not fair. And I know they've made some that, haven't maybe lasted the test of time as others. But I don't care what Hollywood tells them. I don't care about their box office receipts. I just want them to keep making movies together.
So it's funny because Vienna is, she turned 6 this summer. And if you ask her, about movies. She says her favorite movies are Tim Burton movies right now, and I will go for that. But she went to see Dumbo this summer because she found out that Tim Burton directed it. She's like, we have to go see Dumbo. So she's a fan girl. And I mean, her favorite thing is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and she loves Johnny Depp. And she was seeing some of Sleepy Hollow, and she was into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think she's one of us.
Yeah.
How was Dumbo?
I didn't see it. Campbell and Vienna went to it together, and I can't remember what I went to see. Oh, I think I went to see Captain Marvel again. So sorry Tim Burton again. I'm failing him, but you know what? The kids went to see it, so it's fine.
I need to see. I read the book, and I still haven't seen like Home for Extraordinary Peculiar Children or something. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that either. So we are bad people, Meg. We need to get on this.
We've spent this whole podcast talking about the greatness of Tim Burton, and then we do that to him. We'll do better, okay? How can we look at ourselves in the mirror?
Yeah, we will do better. I mean, we're getting a little bit more time on our hands. School, when school is in session, here we have a few more hours in the day. So yes, we will have to catch up. And that is a pug barking in the background saying, "Get on it, ladies." Anything else you want to say about Sleepy Hollow before we rank it?
It's more enjoyable than I even remembered. I think I've always sort of like put it as like, oh well, it's not Edward Scissorhands, it's not like top Tim Burton, but in a way it is, because I don't know. I guess I got that nostalgia factor because it was when it came out, I was in high school and I needed Tim Burton then to sort of, I feel like at that time even he was like an acceptable goth sort of person that I could like in high school and feel comfortable sharing my love of Tim Burton. And so I needed him then, and I need him now still.
You know what I think? I think that in 1999, we just took it for granted that Tim Burton and Johnny Depp would always be making movies together. And like, of course they're going to make Sleepy Hollow. But do you like realizing and looking back now, like we just took it for granted? Like how amazing was that?
It was amazing. You're right. Just if we could just go slap ourselves back then. I know. And then just to see him, and he is Ichabod Crane. He's perfect. And I think back to how much I loved the cartoon character and how funny he is, and I was laughing out loud at him in this.
I love when he's in bed in the corner and he's got the sheet over his mouth and he's like, "There's a headless horseman," and he pulls the sheet back up and they're like, "Yeah, we told you." He's like, "No, but there's a headless horseman. I saw him." And they're like, "Yeah, we know."
Yeah, it's so delightful. And I don't know, I like when horror can be funny, and this movie has the comedy and the romance and the horror, and I love it all.
Oh, me too. Okay, we're going to rank this on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being you hated it, 10 being it's a perfect movie. Our scale, should it be heads in a bag, or is there something very specific to Ichabod that you want to bring up?
What about the bird in the cage?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little bird in the cage on the string thing. How many do you give Sleepy Hollow?
I am going to give it 8.5 because I absolutely love it. I love Tim Burton. The only reason I'm docking it is because it's not scary. That's the only thing. It's got some creepy moments, but I'm not like scared out of my mind when I watch it.
Yeah, I'm ranking it as an 8, and like talking about it and how much I love Tim Burton and Johnny Depp too. I'm like, oh, is that fair? But yeah, I mean, I think it's perfect in a lot of ways, but it's an 8. It's not like the pinnacle of horror for me. But what a gift we were given, and I just love that it exists. And what did we watch it on? Oh, it was on Hulu or something, right? So yeah. It's out there streaming. You can watch it, and oh, he's beautiful. And you know what? If you haven't seen Sweeney Todd, I know a lot of people are scared of musicals, but deal with it. It's amazing. When I went to see Sweeney Todd in the theater during the very first musical number, which is pretty quick, these two guys in the theater, like a row in front of us, got up and walked out, and they're like, "Oh, it's a musical." And it's like, you know what, you guys, you can go F yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. I remember, I thought I didn't like musicals a million years ago because it was like, that was like poured into my brain. But then you realize that that's like, how could you say that? Because there's so many different types of musicals, and maybe there's one type you don't like. So maybe give Sweeney Todd a try, even if you think you don't like musicals. I want to watch it again because I've only seen it one time, and I feel like I need to watch it again.
Okay, well, we're going to watch it for this podcast, and I promise you will not be disappointed. But speaking of musicals, like, and no offense if you love Mamma Mia, but for example, Meg was like, "Ooh, do you love Mamma Mia?" I'm sorry if you do, because she was like tongue crap about it. I'm like, nope, that's not my jam. Sweeney Todd is my jam. Like, there are, definitely different types of musicals. Like, everybody loves Rent, and I don't love Rent. You know, that's my confession. So I'm just putting it out there.
Oh shit! Well, that's okay. You threw me under the bus and said I was talking shit about Mamma Mia. So we're gonna have a lot. You're gonna have Rent people, I'm gonna have Mamma Mia people.
Wait, do you love Rent?
No, I've never seen it in my life.
Okay, it's all fine. No, it's good. But horror musicals. I mean, we just produced this past summer Carrie the musical. There's Evil Dead the musical. There are horror musicals. Of course, Broadway has Beetlejuice right now. So give it a chance.
Yeah, I mean, why are you being so difficult?
I don't know who we're talking about. Oh, you know what I started the other day because I saw it on Amazon? It was the Donner Party, the musical, and I was like, oh, this will either be amazing and delightful or it's going to be terrible. And guess what, guys? I couldn't get through the first number.
Oh, no. You're like the guys.
But it wasn't because it's a musical. It's just because it's bad.
What was it bad, like production value or just tone, or what was the problem?
Production. I'm sorry. And, I mean, I believe in indie filmmakers, but I'm sorry. It just wasn't for me. And maybe just not in that moment. But there is a Donner Party musical, Meg.
I do love the Donner Party, so that would be fun. But maybe I just need to make my own. I'm just going to steal the idea.
So, listen, if you know of a horror musical or just a musical that's sort of dark and goth that we would love, like we loved the Edgar Allan Poe musical that we saw a couple years ago, give us your recommendations. We're always looking for recommendations. But until next time, we will see you in the horror section.